The Afghan conflict. The Afghan conflict, one of the longest and most complex wars in modern history, traces its origins back to the late 1970s. What began as a Soviet invasion sparked a resistance that evolved into an ongoing struggle involving shifting alliances, foreign powers, and ideological clashes. Over time, it became a battleground for global superpowers, with the US and NATO entering in 2001 following the September 11th attacks, aiming to dismantle the Taliban regime. However, after decades of insurgency and international intervention, Afghanistan remains entrenched in a web of violence. Today, the Taliban has reclaimed control, and the country faces a fractured political landscape with widespread instability. Rebel groups, warlords, and foreign actors continue to shape the region's future, while a devastated civilian population suffers under constant threats. Escalations remain frequent, and peace talks are often short-lived. Behind the scenes, global powers manipulate their interests, funding groups or pursuing covert operations to sway the course of war. From the heroin trade to intelligence networks, the darker side of this conflict remains largely hidden from the public eye. War crimes, civilian casualties, and corruption have become an inescapable reality, as millions live in displacement or under constant attack. Crossing this war zone means facing overwhelming danger. The violence, kidnappings, and the presence of militants make it one of the riskiest places on Earth. For civilians, journalists, and anyone caught in the crossfire, survival is a matter of sheer luck. The humanitarian toll has been catastrophic, with millions displaced, thousands dead, and an economy left in ruins. The country struggles to rebuild, as daily life is dominated by fear and uncertainty. On the global stage, Afghanistan remains a symbol of a failed intervention, and the path to peace seems as elusive as ever. With no clear resolution in sight, the Afghan conflict serves as a chilling reminder of the consequences of prolonged war. Crossing into this war zone is not only reckless but a gamble with one's life. The dangers are manifold, and those who venture into this land must understand, the risk is far greater than the rewards. The Ukraine conflict. The Ukraine conflict, a war that has reshaped Eastern Europe and sent shockwaves through the global community. It began in 2014 when Russia's annexation of Crimea sparked a firestorm of violence. Ethnic tensions, political divides, and long-standing geopolitical struggles between Russia, Ukraine, and the West ignited a devastating conflict that still rages today. Over the years, the stakes have only grown. The main players in this brutal war are Ukraine's government forces, the Russian military, and separatist groups backed by Moscow. Ukraine, determined to preserve its sovereignty, faces an enemy with far more resources and firepower. The ground is a battleground of destruction, as cities lie in ruins, and millions of civilians have been displaced. Tensions continue to escalate with each passing day, as Russia pursues its campaign and the world watches, anxiously awaiting a breakthrough in peace talks. But beneath the surface there are darker truths. Foreign interventions, covert operations, and intelligence agencies with their own agendas play a huge part. As both sides spread propaganda, a war of narratives unfolds, leaving the truth obscured. War crimes have been committed, and classified military strategies remain hidden from the world's eyes. The violence is relentless, with civilian casualties mounting. Journalists and aid workers risk their lives to tell the story, while global powers weigh in on whether to escalate or intervene. The war has claimed thousands of lives and plunged Ukraine into poverty. Essential services are crippled, and hunger spreads as the economy falters. For the people of Ukraine, daily life is a struggle for survival, amid bombings, curfews, and uncertainty. Social media, controlled by opposing forces, serves as both a weapon and a battleground for information, with misinformation fueling the flames of war. International media is often caught in the crossfire, trying to report the truth, but facing censorship, bias, and psychological warfare. The future of Ukraine remains uncertain. Will there be peace? Or will this conflict drag on, tearing apart a nation and spreading its shadow to neighboring regions? For anyone considering crossing into this war zone, the dangers are clear. It's a place of intense violence, unpredictability, and a nation fighting to defend its very existence. The Ukraine conflict is far from over, and its consequences could ripple across the world for years to come. Israeli-Palestinian conflict. In the heart of the Middle East, a conflict that has spanned decades continues to shape the fate of millions. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This bitter struggle, rooted in competing nationalisms and territorial disputes, has its origins in the early 20th century. As Jews and Arabs both claim historic ties to the land, tensions erupted into violence in the 1940s with the founding of Israel, displacing hundreds of thousands of Palestinians. Over the years, key events like the Six-Day War and the Oslo Accords have both escalated and, at times, hinted at resolutions, yet peace remains elusive. Today, the conflict is marked by an ongoing battle between Israel and various Palestinian factions, including Hamas. Despite numerous ceasefires, the situation remains volatile, with skirmishes breaking out regularly. The shadow of foreign interventions looms large, as global powers and intelligence agencies navigate their interests in this region. On the ground, violence is a constant, with civilians caught in the crossfire, facing daily threats to their lives. The war has left countless lives lost and created one of the world's most enduring refugee crises. The economy is shattered, infrastructures are decimated, and a generation grows up amid destruction and despair. The human toll is not just in bodies but in broken futures. Propaganda from both sides continues to fuel the flames, manipulating public opinion and exacerbating the divide. Journalists, aid workers, and foreign visitors face grave risks, and anyone crossing into this zone must be aware of the dangers posed by active military operations and unpredictable flare-ups. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is a ticking time bomb, with global repercussions that could escalate the violence beyond borders. Is peace possible? The world waits, watching, hoping for a resolution that might never come, as this tragic struggle for justice, land, and identity continues to unfold. But for now, crossing this war zone is more than a journey into danger. It's a step into the heart of one of the world's most complex and tragic disputes, the Syrian Civil War. The Syrian Civil War, a conflict that erupted in 2011, was born from the Arab Spring's waves of unrest. What started as peaceful protests against the regime of Bashar al-Assad quickly spiraled into a full-scale civil war. Political, ethnic, and sectarian divides, compounded by long-standing authoritarian rule, ignited violence that drew in multiple factions and foreign powers. From Assad's government forces to rebel groups and extremist militias, Syria became a battleground for competing ideologies. Today, the war continues with Syria divided among warring factions, including Assad's forces, Kurdish groups, and various rebel factions. International powers like Russia and the US have bolstered their respective allies, while ceasefires remain fragile and peace talks prove elusive. Behind the chaos, intelligence operations and foreign financial support keep the flames of war burning. War crimes, including chemical attacks and targeted assassinations, stain the history of this ongoing conflict. The dangers are immense. Civilians are caught in the crossfire, suffering from violence, displacement, and disease. Journalists and foreign aid workers risk their lives to report on the ground, while global powers watch as the conflict threatens to destabilize the region. The war has claimed hundreds of thousands of lives and plunged Syria into poverty, with much of the nation's infrastructure destroyed. In this war, the narrative is controlled by those in power, with propaganda fueling hatred on both sides. Misinformation spreads like wildfire, manipulating perceptions and driving further violence. Despite international pressure, there is no clear resolution in sight. The war may stretch on for years, potentially expanding into a wider regional conflict. Syria is a war zone where the risks of crossing remain insurmountable, violent clashes, uncertain allegiances, and the shadow of terrorism loom large. The dangers of crossing this war zone are not just physical but moral, as the human cost continues to rise, leaving the country scarred, uncertain, and fractured. The Sudanese Civil War. The Sudanese Civil War, a protracted and devastating conflict, has its roots deeply embedded in the nation's complex history. Since gaining independence in 1956, Sudan has been marred by political instability, ethnic tensions, and economic disparities. The First Sudanese Civil War erupted in 1955, even before independence, as southern regions, feeling marginalized, rebelled against the central government in Khartoum. This conflict persisted until 1972, culminating in the Addis Ababa Agreement, which temporarily quelled hostilities by granting autonomy to the south. However, peace was short-lived. In 1983, the Second Sudanese Civil War ignited, driven by disputes over resources, religious imposition, and political power. This brutal conflict lasted until 2005, leading to the Comprehensive Peace Agreement and eventually the secession of South Sudan in 2011. Despite these efforts, Sudan plunged into another civil war in April 2023. The power struggle between the Sudanese Armed Forces, SAF, led by General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, and the Rapid Support Forces, RSF, commanded by Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, known as Hemedti, has resulted in widespread violence. The RSF, evolving from the notorious Janjaweed militias accused of atrocities in Darfur, has been implicated in numerous human rights violations during this ongoing conflict. The war has led to a catastrophic humanitarian crisis. Over 28,000 people have lost their lives, and millions have been displaced, both internally and as refugees in neighboring countries. Civilians face daily threats from violence, famine, and disease, with women and children being particularly vulnerable. The international community has condemned the actions of both warring factions, with the United States declaring the RSF's actions in Darfur as genocide. Despite calls for ceasefires and peace negotiations, the conflict shows little sign of abating, leaving the future of Sudan uncertain and its people in dire need of assistance. Traveling through Sudan's war zones is perilous. The pervasive violence, risk of kidnapping, and lack of basic services make it extremely dangerous for anyone to cross these areas. The ongoing conflict has rendered many regions lawless, with armed groups operating unchecked, posing severe risks to all who enter. The Mexican Drug War. The Mexican Drug War, a relentless conflict that has gripped the nation for decades, finds its roots in the early 20th century. Prohibition in the United States during the 1920s and 1930s saw Mexican bootleggers supplying alcohol to American gangsters, laying the groundwork for future smuggling operations. As the century progressed, Mexico became a pivotal transshipment point for narcotics, with the Guadalajara cartel, led by Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo, dominating the trade in the 1980s. Following his arrest in 1989, the cartel fragmented, leading to the rise of powerful successors like the Sinaloa, Juarez, and Tijuana cartels. Today, the primary actors in this violent saga include the Mexican government and formidable cartels such as the Sinaloa and Jalisco New Generation. The landscape is marred by daily confrontations, territorial disputes, and a pervasive atmosphere of fear. Recent years have witnessed escalating violence, with cartels employing increasingly brutal tactics to assert dominance. Beneath the surface lies a web of corruption and clandestine operations. Allegations of collusion between certain government officials and cartels have surfaced, suggesting that some authorities may have turned a blind eye or even facilitated drug trafficking activities. These hidden alliances have perpetuated the cycle of violence and undermined efforts to establish peace. The dangers are palpable. Civilians find themselves caught in the crossfire, with entire communities displaced due to threats and violence. Journalists face grave risks, with many silenced for exposing cartel activities. The pervasive atmosphere of fear and intimidation has led to widespread self-censorship, further obscuring the true extent of the conflict. The toll is staggering. Since the conflict's escalation in 2006, over 300,000 lives have been lost, with countless others affected by the pervasive violence. The nation's economy has suffered, with businesses shuttered and tourism declining due to safety concerns. Everyday life is fraught with uncertainty, as citizens navigate a landscape where the rule of law often seems absent. In the battle for public perception, both the government and cartels employ sophisticated propaganda. The government seeks to project an image of control and progress, while cartels often use social media to intimidate rivals and recruit members. This information warfare further complicates efforts to discern truth from manipulation. Looking ahead, the path to resolution remains uncertain. While various strategies have been proposed, including potential negotiations and reforms, the deep-rooted nature of the conflict poses significant challenges. International collaboration and comprehensive domestic reforms may offer a glimmer of hope, but the journey toward peace is fraught with obstacles. Given the pervasive violence, systemic corruption, and unpredictable nature of the conflict, venturing into regions affected by the Mexican drug war poses significant risks. Travelers may encounter dangers such as armed confrontations, kidnappings, and extortion. The volatile environment makes it imperative to exercise extreme caution and, where possible, avoid these areas entirely. Somali Civil War. For over 3 decades, Somalia has been engulfed in relentless conflict. What began in 1991 with the fall of Siad Barre's dictatorship quickly spiraled into a brutal power struggle among warlords, militias, and extremist factions. The nation fractured, clan-based rivalries deepened, and governance collapsed. Amid the chaos, al-Shabaab emerged, imposing a reign of terror while foreign interventions, from U.S. operations to African Union peacekeepers, fueled tensions rather than resolving them. Civilians remain trapped in an endless cycle of violence, displacement, and famine, with over 500,000 lives lost and millions forced from their homes. Somalia's economy is in ruins, its people enduring poverty, hunger, and shattered infrastructure. War propaganda and misinformation distort reality, fueling fear and prolonging suffering. Today the fighting continues. Peace talks come and go, but a true resolution seems distant. Crossing this war zone means risking your life. Kidnappings, bombings, and lawlessness await those who dare to enter. Somalia remains a battlefield where survival is never guaranteed. The Western Sahara Conflict. The Western Sahara conflict traces back to 1975, when Spain withdrew from its North African colony, leaving a territorial dispute between Morocco and the indigenous Sahrawi people, led by the Polisario Front. Morocco annexed the region, prompting a protracted struggle for independence by the Polisario. A 16-year insurgency culminated in a 1991 UN-brokered ceasefire, which included a promise of a referendum on self-determination, a pledge yet to be fulfilled. Today the conflict endures, with Morocco controlling approximately 80% of the territory, including its valuable resources, while the Polisario Front administers the remainder. The situation remains tense, with occasional skirmishes and a fragile ceasefire. Recent diplomatic developments, such as the United States recognizing Moroccan sovereignty over Western Sahara in 2020, have further complicated the landscape. Beneath the surface, the conflict harbors underreported facets. Allegations of human rights abuses, media censorship, and the suppression of dissenting voices have emerged from both sides. The involvement of foreign powers, driven by strategic interests, adds layers of complexity to the dispute. The protracted nature of the conflict has inflicted significant hardships on the Sahrawi people. Many live in refugee camps in Algeria, facing challenges such as limited access to resources and opportunities. The region's economic potential remains largely untapped due to the ongoing instability, hindering development and prosperity. Media narratives surrounding the conflict are often polarized. Both Morocco and the Polisario Front have been accused of controlling information to sway public opinion, leading to a complex web of propaganda and counter-narratives. This manipulation complicates efforts to understand the true dynamics at play. Looking ahead, the path to resolution remains uncertain. While international efforts continue, a lasting solution has yet to materialize. The Sahrawi people's aspirations for self-determination persist, but geopolitical interests and entrenched positions pose significant obstacles. Traveling through this disputed territory presents considerable risks. The presence of landmines, military checkpoints, and sporadic clashes between opposing forces make it a hazardous area for civilians and visitors alike. The unresolved status of Western Sahara contributes to an unpredictable security environment, underscoring the dangers of crossing this war zone. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe for more videos.